Through a couple updates and schedule before I get to your questions, and Jeff will get the first one. First off, Secretary Ross, I know, was up here last night to tell you about the developments, and General McMaster just noted at the developments that have happened and advances that have happened in trade. The 10 commitments that Secretary Ross announced yesterday are the initial results of the 100-day action plan of the United States-China Comprehensive Economic Dialogue, which began with President Trump and President Xi's meeting in Mar-a-Lago. Under the leadership of Secretaries Ross, Mnuchin, and their Chinese counterparts, the United States has negotiated intensively to reach consensus in areas including agricultural trade, financial services, investment, and energy. One of the actions I want to point out in particular sets the stage for China to allow imports of American beef beginning no later than July 16th of this year. It's been 13 years since our cattle producers have been effectively locked out of the Chinese market. China is the second largest beef importer in the world, buying roughly $2.6 billion of beef every year. In a statement last night, the National Cattlemen's Beef Association, the nation's largest association of cattle farmers, said, and I quote, "It's impossible to overstate how beneficial this will be for America's cattle producers and how the Trump administration deserves a lot of credit for getting this achieved," end quote. This announcement came on the same day that Secretary Perdue visited a barge loading facility in the Ohio River and announced that he will appoint the first ever Undersecretary for Trade and Foreign Agriculture Affairs at the U.S. Department of Agriculture. This is further proof of the seriousness of which the administration is approaching the promotion of U.S. agricultural products abroad. And that's just one part of the deal that was reached. Here are some of the other highlights that we have worked with China. 8 pending biotech patents from the United States firms will be evaluated at a meeting of China's National Biosafety Committee by the end of May. We welcome China to receive imported liquefied natural gas, with companies allowed to proceed at any time to negotiate contracts. China will allow foreign-owned financial services firms in China to provide credit rating services and credit investigations. By July 16th, China will issue further guidance to allow American-owned suppliers of electronic payment services to operate in China. And China will allow 2 American financial institutions to issue underwriting and settlement licenses no later than July 16th. As we continue to make progress within the 100-day framework, including discussion of a 1-year plan to solidify action that will benefit both of our countries. Moving on, this morning, Attorney General Sessions issued a memo that restores flexibility to prosecutors so that they can most effectively combat the crisis of illegal drug trafficking that is polluting our cities and destroying our communities and families. This policy was formulated after extensive consultation with the prosecutors that handle these cases each and every day around the country. With these additional options available to them, they now have the leverage they need to get at the root of drug trafficking and the violent crime that surrounds it. As the Attorney General said this morning, this will take the handcuffs off our nation's prosecutors, and if I can add, it frankly puts the handcuffs on the drug traffickers who threaten the safety of our families and communities. The Trump administration is signaling to the worst of the worst, the drug traffickers who violate our drug laws to move these dangerous substances around our border and into our communities, that the United States Department of Justice will no longer look the other way. This week, the administration has also been busy engaging with senators and their staffs now that the American Health Care Act and the relief it promises for the American people is in the Senate's hands. I know Sarah talked to you yesterday about how Aetna has pulled out of Obamacare exchanges completely, leaving only one insurer in some of the markets. Another report yesterday out from eHealth showed that the average premium for individual plans has spiked 39% since 2014. In some cases, insurance premiums and out-of-pocket expenses have become families' most significant expenses. With each new report, it becomes clearer and clearer that we can't wait any longer to repeal and replace this failing system. Until we enact serious reforms of the healthcare system, the American people will continue to suffer under the consequences. Tomorrow, the President will deliver his first commencement address in Lynchburg, Virginia at Liberty. He is greatly looking forward to visiting with Liberty students and faculty who gave him such a warm welcome last year. He can be expected to note to the graduates his own change in status since they were last together. As many of you know, Liberty is the largest Christian school in the nation and has in recent years made many remarkable strides forward in its academic, extracurricular, and athletic endeavors. Besides taking note of these achievements, the President will be congratulating the graduates on their accomplishments and encouraging them to be a force for good in the world by standing up for their values that liberty has taught them. He will be offering congratulations, thanks, and praise and encouragement on a day of optimism and new beginnings for the graduates as well as the nation. In terms of the rundown for next week, the President has a very packed schedule before we depart on his first foreign trip. On Monday, he's hosting the Crown Prince of the United Arab Emirates. On Tuesday, he'll welcome the President of Turkey. On Wednesday, the President will travel to New London, Connecticut to deliver the commencement address at the United States Coast Guard Academy. On Thursday, the President of Colombia will be at the White House for an official visit. And on Friday, we set off on the trip, with the first stop being Saudi Arabia. And finally, in honor of Mother's Day, this afternoon, the First Lady will host a reception in honor of military mothers in the residence, followed by a performance by the Army Chorus and Marine Band. The White House will issue a Mother's Day proclamation later as well. Beyond all of the activity here, this is the official reminder to everyone to get your flowers and cards before it's too late. And with that, Jeff Mason.
Thank you for that reminder, Sean.
You're welcome.
Moving on to the news of the week, really, and the day, did President Trump record his conversations with former FBI Director Comey?
I assume you're referring to
His tweet.
the tweet, and I've talked to the President. The President has nothing further to add on that.
Why did he say that? Why did he tweet that? What should we interpret from that?
As I mentioned, the President has nothing further to add on that.
Are there recording devices in the Oval Office or in the residence?
As I've said for the third time, there is nothing further to add on that.
Does he think it's appropriate to threaten someone like Mr. Comey not to speak?
I don't think that's not a threat. He's simply stated a fact. The tweet speaks for itself. I'm moving on. John.
If I could quote another one of the President's tweets this morning, he said, quote, "Russia must be laughing up their sleeves watching as the U.S. tears itself apart over a Democrat excuse for losing the election." What did the President mean by that? How specifically is the U.S. tearing itself apart over all of this?
I think the President's comments about Russia and collusion have been very clear with respect to some of the charges that have been made. He's been very clear that it's one thing that he believes that the notion that there's collusion is a hoax. It's been reaffirmed by several people, including Senator Grassley and others who have spoken to him, and that he wants to make sure that he's focused every day on doing what's best for the American people.
I understand all that, and we've said that many times, but how is the U.S. tearing itself apart?
Well, I think obviously this has been a subject that comes up over and over again when it's been very clearly stated on multiple occasions that there's no collusion that occurred, and yet this narrative continues to be perpetuated.
Do you think this is what the Russians wanted all along in interfering with the election?
I don't. I have no idea. But what I'm just telling you is I think we've made it clear at this podium several times, and I think the President made it clear that what his feelings are on this.
Sean, in the dinner that the President had with James Comey earlier in January, did the President implore him to pledge his loyalty to the President? Is that true?
No.
Did that happen? That did not happen?
No.
How important is it that the FBI Director be loyal to the President? Is that a quality the President wants to see in anyone, particularly his FBI Director?
I think the President wants loyalty to this country and to the rule of law. Trey.
Thanks, Sean. On the dinner with James Comey, does anyone in this White House have an audio recording of what unfolded during the January 27th dinner between the former FBI Director and the President of the United States?
I'm not aware of that.
I have one follow-up question for you. What can the administration do better when it comes to communication? Today, the President tweeted out that he felt from behind that podium it's not always possible to present the information with perfect accuracy.
Mm-hmm. So, I think we come out here every day and try to do the best job we can communicating what the President's done and the accomplishments he's making on the American people. We get here early. We work beyond being here at this podium. As many of you know, we get here early. We work pretty late. We do what we can, but the President is an activist president. He keeps a very robust schedule, as many of you are very well aware, and as you can tell by the activities of next week alone. And I think sometimes we don't have an opportunity to get in to see him, to get his full thinking. In those cases, we do our best to follow up with you. But I think that there are times when you, more than not, read a story where someone's trying to pull apart one word, one sentence, and say, aha, and make it a gotcha thing. We work very hard to get you the most accurate and up-to-date information throughout the day. We don't always have the opportunity to get in to see the president, and in those cases, I think we do a pretty good job of following up and getting you the information after the briefing or in a subsequent. So that's exactly what he meant.
Is the president considering canceling the daily press briefings?
I think he's a little dismayed, as well as a lot of people, that we come out here and try to do everything we can to provide you and the American people with what he's doing on their behalf, what he's doing to keep the nation safe, what he's doing to grow jobs, and yet we see time and time again an attempt to parse every little word and make it more of a game of gotcha, as opposed to really figure out what the policies are, why something's being pursued, or what the update is on this. And I think that's where there's a lot of dismay, and I don't think it's something that just alone the president feels.
Can I ask you one final logistical question?
Final. It's Friday.
On the original question I had about the dinner on January 27th with James Comey,
right.
The president wasn't clear during the NBC interview who invited the FBI director to the White House at that time. How many invitations did the White House send to Director James Comey after January 20th and before the director was fired?
I don't know. I'll try to get back to you. Katie.
Hey, Sean. I have a question about the Turkish president's visit next week. He recently President Erdogan called for Muslims to rush the Temple Mount, considering the president has said he's a mediator for peace between the Palestinians and the Israelis. What is his response to that? And then I have another question.
So I think what you've seen with the president's meeting with these leaders is he engages privately in a lot of these things, and I think to a large degree, he's been able to achieve great success, whether Aya Higazi in that particular case, working behind the scenes, whether it's the progress that he's made with China. The president's behind-the-scenes diplomacy is paying dividends for the United States, and that's how he's going to continue to operate. And as General McMaster noted, it's that kind of diplomacy that's reasserting our position in the world, and that trust and those relationships continue to be built.
Are those comments helpful?
Well, again, I think there's a difference, Katie. If we can get out here and I think what the president believes is that behind-the-scenes diplomacy pays dividends in terms of affecting behavior and outcomes and furthering the goals of the United States. So that's as much as I want to say there.
My other question is the discussion about the refugee crisis, which is fueling problems in Europe. The president has talked about refugees being a problem in the United States and terrorists hiding refugees. Or refugees hiding in the terrorists hiding in the refugee stream. Excuse me. Is he going to talk about that with Arab leaders specifically when he visits Saudi Arabia, or is that not something that he's willing to bring up to those? I
mean, he's talked about safe zones. He talked about it yesterday with the foreign minister, or earlier this week rather. He's brought it up on the calls.
But in Saudi Arabia specifically.
I'm not going to get ahead of his conversations that he's going to have, but I think the president's been very publicly clear about his desire to address that situation and some of the solutions that exist. But he's in a lot of the readouts we've had that as part of it because he believes that has to be part of a solution. John.
Thanks so much, Sean. In an interview that the president conducted yesterday with NBC, he indicated and confirmed that on 3 separate occasions he asked the director of the FBI and received assurances from the FBI that he was not under investigation by the FBI. Why was the president seemingly so consumed by this that he would ask that question on 3 separate occasions?
I think because the narrative continued to be perpetuated, and he wanted clarity to make sure. But again, I haven't spoken to him on it about the reason, but I think he answered it yesterday very clearly, and so I can get back to you, but that's the answer.
I would appreciate you getting back to me. And as far as asking that question, did the president ask the White House counsel whether it would be appropriate to ask such a question, given that it was against generally Justice Department guidelines to indicate whether or not investigations are ongoing against any individual, let alone one at the White House?
I don't know. I will tell you that I know several legal scholars, including Alan Dershowitz and others, have said there was nothing inappropriate about that. Dave.
Counsel to the White House counsel?
I don't know the answer.
Okay,
no.
Thank you.
Dave.
General McMaster mentioned that on the trip the president's going to be raising the issue of religious persecution, I believe of the Pope. And I wanted to ask you about a case in the last week in Indonesia where a Christian governor in the state of Jakarta was imprisoned for 2 years for blaspheming the Quran. Does the president find that case troubling? Does he plan to say anything in way
Did
of
John
protest?
Gizzi give you this question?
I'm sorry. No.
I don't have any updates on that particular case. I would ask you to check with the State Department. Zeke.
Thanks, Sean. I just want to put a finer point on Jeff's question. I'm hoping you can answer this in a yes or no fashion. Is the President of the United States currently recording conversations taking place in the Oval Office?
I think the point that I made with respect to the tweet is the President has no further comment on this. Cam.
Follow up, since you were involved in this on Tuesday night as well, giving a blanket answer saying at the time that it was all him regarding Deputy Attorney General Rod Rosenstein. Why did you come out with information that was later contradicted by the President 2 days later? Could you explain the TikTok? When were you brought in? Who else was involved? Why were the American people given incorrect information that night?
I don't necessarily believe that that's true, Zeke. There was a decision-making process. The President explained it in the interview process. The bottom line is that the Director of the FBI serves the pleasure of the President. The President made a decision to replace him, as he has stated very clearly now publicly. The President is now focused on making sure that he finds a replacement that has the leadership qualities to lead the FBI. That's it, plain and simple. Cam.
Sean, I want to follow up on that real briefly. What you said Tuesday doesn't match what the President was laying out yesterday. Can you walk through why the discrepancy in terms of whose decision this was?
Well, it's always the President's decision. That's it, final.
Did he pick the...
As I mentioned to Zeke, this is ultimately the President's, always going to be the President's decision. Everyone who serves at the pleasure of the President, it's ultimately going to be his decision to hire someone, to fire someone. He made a decision, in part based on the recommendation, and he's now focused on making sure that we have a replacement at the FBI to instill the proper leadership they need. Blake.
Let me ask you about the way forward as it relates to who the President might nominate to be the FBI director. Where does that process stand right now? How many people have been interviewed? Does the President hope to wrap this up before he goes overseas?
On the timing, I think as soon as he finds a candidate that fits the qualities that he feels are necessary to lead the FBI, that's the timeline of that. I know that the Department of Justice has begun to create that list, and I believe they're going to, if they haven't already, are going to be starting the process of interviewing people either today or through the weekend. But I mean, the President obviously wants to make sure that we've got the right person, and that process is being headed by the Department of Justice.
The other day about how somebody not necessarily being political in that role, if somebody has been a member of Congress, past or present, does that count as an automatic disqualifier as somebody who is?
I've not asked the President, but I don't believe that he has stated any sort of in and out. The Department of Justice is screening candidates, and I'm sure that as they feel as though they've got a list of finalists, they'll share that with the President, and he'll make a decision.
And lastly, does the President still have confidence? The other day, someone asked, does the President have confidence in Andrew McCabe after the testimony on Capitol Hill the other day? Is that still the case? He is the acting director at this moment.
I've not asked him about the deputy. I've not asked him about his. Generally, I don't go through the list of government employees and ask him, so I've not asked him specifically about that. Eamon.
Yesterday, Sarah told us that the President expects that the FBI investigation will be wrapped up with integrity. That's what the White House wants. Today, the President tweeted and called it a witch hunt. How does tweeting and calling it a witch hunt help wrap that investigation up with integrity?
The President, no one wants this done. He wants to know very clearly. There's two pieces of this. Right, which is what was Russia's involvement. And the President is obviously very concerned about any entity's attempts to influence the United States election. And that's one investigation. I think the second, this false narrative that we continue to fight every day, that has been debunked by intelligence individuals, members of Congress who've been briefed over and over again, that's where I think he's growingly concerned, as well as a number of American people who are growingly concerned that there is this perpetuated false narrative out there. That's I think, the nut of this.
I talked to a former FBI official today who said that the President's tweet, the implicit threat to former FBI Director James Comey, indicates that the President, in his words, is simply out of control. I'd like to get you to respond to that. Is he?
That's frankly offensive. John.
Thank you, Sean. Two questions about the FBI director selection process. You said the names are coming from the Justice Department right now. Is the President consulting with Democratic congressional leaders as well, or Republican congressional leaders on this? Or is he just getting names out of DOJ?
That's a good question. I know that he was, obviously he's going to take input from them. I don't know what specific conversations he's had, so I'd be glad to check on who he's spoken to or maybe speaking to. Anita.
I had a
I'm sorry, I forgot you too.
follow-up question.
I got confused that Dave stole one.
Now, I know that you said you're not disqualifying anyone on this. You also know there has been considerable mention in the last 24 hours of former House Intelligence Committee Chairman Mike Rogers as the new FBI director. Does the president have a meeting planned this weekend with Congressman Rogers?
I'm not aware of anything of that nature on his schedule. But we'll obviously, as you know, I mean, we'll put out, if there's a meeting, we'll put it out for you. Right now, there's nothing that I'm aware of on the schedule, but generally we put out the next day schedule later in the evening, and we will do that as well. Kristen.
You already called.
I'm sorry. Sorry, getting a little.
I had a couple questions about the president's remarks to NBC about General Flynn. He said that it wasn't an emergency, or he didn't think it was an emergency, and that's why the firing dismissal didn't happen right away. So I had a couple questions about that. Why didn't he think it was an emergency? And was it because of the messenger? Was it because the information came from Sally Yates, who you called an opponent, I think a political opponent of the president? Or is it because Don McGahn downplayed the situation? Can you explain what he meant by that? And I had a follow-up.
I can't specifically say what he meant by that, but what I can tell you is, I mean, again, look at the timeline that happened. We went over this the other day, and this has been asked and answered multiple times. The former acting attorney general came and said, I want to give you a heads up on something. Don McGahn, the counsel's office, informed the president. They asked for the documents or materials that she had referred to. It took, I forgot now, 5 or 6 days to get those. They reviewed them, and he was asked to resign shortly thereafter. But I think that there is a difference. There wasn't a review process. That was the review process in this case. As the president noted yesterday during his interview, he had been thinking about this for a long time. The Justice Department had done a review. But again, I'm not really sure in both cases.
Comey? So then, since you just
No, you just asked me what's
justice, though. Is that what you're talking about?
No, what I'm saying is you're asking why it wasn't an emergency. I think, but it's not a question of his emergency. He took the time to do due process. Someone comes to you with an allegation. I think everyone deserves due process to make sure that allegation, someone coming in and giving you a heads up, we did exactly what was necessary, and the president made the right decision, and he continues to stand by it.
Okay, so then two follow-ups. One, why, I'm still unclear, and you've mentioned this several times, why did it take so long for the White House to get those documents?
I don't know. I think we've.
The White House asking, you couldn't go get the documents?
That's not. Making it sound that is rather, with all due respect, it's not how it works. They're the ones who possess the documents. They had them in their possession. I believe they asked for them, and it took a while.
Is it because she was fired, though, in between?
No. I think part of it is just there's some of these things don't happen as easily in terms of where they're stored. I don't know the answer, but I think that in the course of action, if you look at the intervening days, that's a question that you should ask the Department of Justice.
Okay, and I sort of had a follow-up.
I'm sure.
Just explain to us then a little bit when you compare these two situations with General Flynn and Director Comey. The memo came one day, and he was fired that day. That was the review process, and General Flynn was 18 days. No, that's a huge difference. Why was one so fast when one was 18 days?
Well, I think first of all, they both had a review. They both came, and the president looked at the information and the reviews and made a decision. Ultimately, as I mentioned, that's his job. He's the decider. He felt as though he had the information necessary in both cases to act, and he did. Vivian.
Sean, in the tweet about Director Comey, he said the president says that he better be careful before he goes leaking to the press. Yesterday on NBC News, the president called him a showboat and a grandstander. Does the White House acknowledge that Director Comey has a First Amendment right to speak to the press if he so chooses to set the record straight about any of this? Instead of just leaking. It may not be leaking, it may just be his First Amendment right to speak to the press.
Well, everyone in this country has a First Amendment right. I think the difference, and you've heard the president echo this multiple times, is that sharing information that's not meant to be or is not authorized to be in the public domain in terms of the classification of it is concerning. And I think the president's been very clear over and over again of his concern with respect to information that gets put in the public domain that's not meant to be. But I don't think that those are. Everyone in this country has every right to speak their mind and express themselves in accordance with the Constitution.
Okay, and follow up, just in terms of the FBI being in disarray, also with the president's comments, is he concerned that if he continues like this, that it could jeopardize morale at the FBI instead of actually kind of correcting a problem that he obviously observes there?
Well, I think that one of the reasons that he wants to go through the process of finding an individual who can lead the FBI and the men and women who serve there so bravely and ably is to make sure that morale and the focus is as it's supposed to be, and that you have a leader that can do that. And you know, as you mentioned, it's the crown jewel of law enforcement. And I think the reason that he wants to go through this process and choose a leader that can be restore leadership, you know, ensure that morale stays where it needs to be, and that there's a focus. That's why he's conducting the process that he has. And so, Jessica.
Can I give my question to Kristen and then take the question back?
What's that?
You called on her first, so I just wanted to give her the question that you promised her before, and then I'll pick up from there.
I'll your question. Thank you. I just want to. I want to ask
currency exchange back there with questions.
I want to ask you. President Trump seemed to rely on James Clapper this morning when he tweeted that virtually he and everyone else with knowledge of the witch hunt says there is no collusion. James Clapper himself today told Andrea Mitchell, I don't know if there was collusion or not. I don't know if there's evidence of collusion or not, nor should I. On March 5th on Meet the Press, when he was asked a similar question, he said, not to my knowledge. So can you describe the discrepancy and explain it?
No. I actually think that that's a great question that you should ask Director Clapper. I think
between Director Clapper's comments and President Trump, why is he leaning on Clapper when he said, I have no knowledge of whether there was collusion?
No, I think on several occasions Director Clapper has said that he has no knowledge of any collusion. That's it. I mean, that's the point that he hasn't
been briefed. He said he wouldn't know because he hasn't been briefed.
He was DNI up until January 20th.
Very clear today that he said, nor should I have in this particular context. He made the case that he's not briefed on an FBI investigation, that that's not his purview.
Fair enough. He's the Director of National Intelligence. On multiple occasions prior to today, he made it very clear that he was unaware of any collusion.
The point was he wouldn't know. Well, right? There's been no final conclusion.
Right, I understand. I understand that, but then, so the question that I would ask then, Kristen, is then why did he say what he said before? It seems his testimony and comments on multiple occasions prior to today was, I have no evidence that there was any collusion, right? So to suddenly today shift a story, I believe that the question should be asked to him. You were the Director of National Intelligence. You said multiple times, including in testimony in front of Congress, under oath, that there was no collusion. I believe that that's a question for him.
Final conclusion made about this investigation, right? There's an ongoing investigation. He's not making that argument, is he?
I understand, but my point is that all we're able to do at this point is that the people who are aware of the former Director of National Intelligence, the head of the nation's agencies, intelligence agencies, makes multiple statements, as others, Charles, Senator Grassley and others, talking about the involvement, making it very clear that there was none. We took him at their word then, and we continue to believe.
His argument is he wanted
well, then that again, I think that. But the question, Kristen, before you move on, is then why did he make the statements that he did when he did? To turn around now, months later, and say, well, even though I made those comments on multiple occasions, I wasn't briefed.
But the comments are not mutually exclusive, like you say,
I appreciate.
It's not surprising or abnormal that I would not have known about the investigation.
Yeah, it sounds like the story has changed.
The context of the investigation.
Right. Okay. Well, ultimately, there's been several.
Very quickly about the accuracy.
Well, do you mind if I think in this case, it is interesting how the story has changed. He made those comments several times over several courses of action. And to say that the Director of National Intelligence, who stated unequivocally what his position was on multiple occasions before today, and now suddenly is saying, I wasn't sure about it, that the burden seems to be on him, not us.
He wasn't saying he wasn't sure. He said he wasn't. But moving on to the accuracy.
You can apply for like a Clapper spokesman job.
No, but I just am interested in the discrepancy in drawing a
And I think that that's a great thing to ask him.
No, on the part of the President, drawing the final conclusion about the investigation. In terms of the accuracy tweet, should we take that tweet to mean that you don't have the full picture when you stand at that podium?
As I said, we come up here every day, not just to the podium, but you know, we are here first thing in the morning till late at night every day, answering your questions on a variety of subjects and throughout issues that are happening in the government. We, as most of you can attest, work day and night to make sure that we get you the most up-to-date, accurate information at all times. With respect to the president, as I mentioned, he's an activist president. He keeps an unbelievably busy and robust schedule. And there are times when we give you the information that we have at the time and we seek to get an update. And I believe that you and others will attest to when we don't have an answer, we try really hard to either update you after the fact or to get you the facts that we didn't have at the time. But we work really hard every day to do that. And I think the president's point that I pointed out earlier is that there are times when we're asked a question, we do our best to give you the answer, and every word is picked apart to try to figure out how to make an issue out of it, as opposed to allowing us to, you know, talk to the president, get his current thinking and updates if we hadn't had an opportunity to do that at this time. Jennifer.
Sean, can I actually pick up?
I'm sorry,
there,
Jessica, then we'll do the J's.
So I wanted to ask you about the One Belt, One Road summit that starts on Sunday in China. You announced yesterday, or Secretary Ross did, that you're going to send a delegation to that summit.
Yeah.
Can you talk about how you came to that conclusion, why it's important for the U.S. to be represented at what's ostensibly a major trade initiative by a foreign country?
As you point, it's a major trade initiative. There's a lot of ports and infrastructure that they're looking to do, and through those discussions that Secretary Ross and Secretary Mnuchin and others had at Mar-a-Lago, and part of this is that is something that they've done. We're going to continue to work with them. Obviously, trade is a major issue for us, and what they're looking to do is of great importance to our economic and national security, and they've asked us to send people to that. And we have them attend things that we're doing as well. And I think that's, as the president has shown, in terms of the relationship that he's built with President Xi and the rest of the team built with their delegation, those relationships are clearly paying dividends both on the national security front and on the economic front. Jennifer.
Is it a signal that the U.S. is going to participate in the One Belt, One Road initiative?
We'll have a readout. At this point, that's all we have on One Belt, One Road.
Two questions. The first one on loyalty and the next one on the visit to the FBI headquarters. So this president does value loyalty. Was there any sort of, before you were hired, any sort of request or hint that you pledged personal loyalty to him at all before you were hired?
No. I've pledged my loyalty to the Constitution and to the American people, as has everyone who serves in our government and this administration, and we stand by that.
Is it true that the president was warned that he might not be well received at the FBI headquarters if you were to visit?
I don't, not that I'm aware of. Thank you guys. Have a great weekend. We'll see you on Monday. Thank you. Bye.
And those questions continued, and out he goes, Sean Spicer. Here we are on another incredibly busy Friday. I'm Brooke Baldwin. You're watching CNN. Just a massive moment in the firestorm over President Trump's firing of the FBI Director James Comey. The White House trying to insist the president's threat to Comey was, in fact, not a threat after all. The president tweeted earlier that Comey better, quote, hope there aren't tapes of their conversation. So let me bring in my panel, and Gloria Borger, to you first on that threat, non-threat. I mean, again, you know, when you read the tweet, how is that not threatening language?
Well, it is threatening language to me and to lots of other people, particularly coming from the President of the United States. Today, Sean Spicer said it was not a threat, and then he said he's simply stating a fact, and then he said, I'm moving on. What struck me today, though, Brooke, was that Sean Spicer repeatedly refused to answer the question of whether the president is taping Oval Office conversations. And
3 different times I noticed. 3 different times. Let me just point that out. And I think that the answer, actually, we have the sound, then we'll talk on the other side.
Right.
Did President Trump record his conversations with former FBI Director Comey?
I assume you're referring to the tweet, and I've talked to the president. The president has nothing further to add on that.
And why did he say that? Why did he tweet that? What should we interpret from that?
As I mentioned, the president has nothing further to add on that.
Are there recording devices in the Oval Office or in the residence?
As I said for the 3rd time, there is nothing further to add on that.
Does he think it's appropriate to threaten someone like Mr. Comey not to speak?
I don't think that's not a threat. He's simply stated a fact. The tweet speaks for itself. I'm moving on.
And Gloria, one other time, where again asked about recording anything in the Oval, his response, no comment. How is that a no comment question?
Well, again, he said, I have nothing further to add on the taping, which is not a denial, right? It's sort of, I have nothing further to add on
Not
that.
a yes, not a no.
Not a yes, not a no. And then on the dinner conversation, on the loyalty pledge question, he said flat out it was not true. He did not say, as he did in the answer to the other question about taping, that he had talked directly to the president about that. So my question is now, do we always have to say, have you talked directly to the president about this before we get an answer that can be credible?
Well, as we know, according to the president's Twitter, he's a busy guy, and so there's an accuracy issue apparently at times with folks who stand at that podium. Mark Preston, I want your 2 cents to Gloria's point about recording devices in the Oval Office and Sean's sort of non-response.
So let's frame it through the whole idea that Donald Trump thrives on chaos. Well, if he thrives on chaos, then he must be having a heck of a good time today, because what he has done has created this level of chaos within the executive branch right now that at some point is going to be unsustainable. You can't have the person speaking for the free world, Sean Spicer, up there at
take.
Wow, I got to tell you, Brooke, I mean, watching that, I mean, Sean Spicer is typically described as confrontational, right, or beleaguered. Today, empathetic figure. I'm watching him after you said, after the 3 times he was asked the question about the 140-character smoke grenade that was tossed into Washington, and I'm watching him trying to field that, and for the president to send him out there, his spokesperson, and not to supply him with some type of context or meaning to what any attorney could only describe as an implied threat. If this was a criminal case, you have the evidence right there in 140 characters.
What about you?
Untenable. It's just untenable. It reminds me of the day the president posted those unfounded claims about wiretapping, and
Quote,
Sean Spicer said,
just as quote,
he said, we're not going to have any more comment on this. We're not going to say another word about it. Obviously, the White House had a lot more to say about wiretapping. Trump had a lot more to say about it. Trump will have a lot more to say about the claims he shared on Twitter today. I thought Spicer was up at the podium essentially saying, these tweets are no big deal, guys. What's the big deal? Who cares about these tweets? Pay attention to our trade deals with China. But every reporter in that room, I think most viewers watching, know the tweets are a big deal. He also seemed to be saying the president's just sick and tired of turning on the TV and hearing Russia, 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 about hearing about these investigations. But they're not going to go away just because the president can change the channel.
On the tapes, though, Pamela Brown, let me ask you, because you have all this reporting from your source close to James Comey as he referenced these tapes. What did you learn?
Right. I mean, you heard there in the briefing, Spicer basically not even going there, not answering questions whether there even is a recording device in the Oval Office or elsewhere in the White House. I spoke to a source familiar with what's going on with James Comey today, and this source basically said that James Comey is not worried about any tapes, that if there is a tape, if something like that exists that recorded the conversation he had with President Trump, that he's not worried about it, essentially that he has nothing to hide regarding what could be on those tapes. And the source said that former director James Comey and President Trump had dinner on January 27th, a few days after President Trump had told James Comey that he would stay on in the FBI. And I'm told that the notion, what President Trump said yesterday, that James Comey wanted to have that dinner to ask if he could stay on in the job is absolutely false, that he already was told he could stay on in the job, and that this came as the president's requested. It was a one-on-one dinner. Here's what James Clapper had to say about that day to MSNBC today.
Jim and I spoke briefly before the ceremony, and he mentioned that he had been invited to the White House to have dinner with the president, and that he was uneasy with that because of even compromising even the optics, the appearance of independence, not only of him but of the FBI.
So, but he was going that very night to the dinner. Did he explain why he felt he had to go?
Well, I think anyone who serving officer in the government, and you're asked by the president for dinner, I think is professional courtesy. You're in a difficult position to refuse to go.
And the source I spoke with said that James Comey knew it was possible that he could lose his job at some point, especially when he did not agree to the loyalty pledge that Sean Spicer denies ever happened. And then later, of course, a fallout over refuting the president's wiretap claims. But Comey did not expect it when it happened. He thought at least he would get a phone call of some sort from the president or someone else telling him this was coming. He was completely taken aback by the way he found out on television when he was talking to agents in the FBI LA field office. I should note there's this open question of whether he's going to testify next week in front of the Senate Intelligence Committee. The source I spoke with said at this point that's unlikely, but Comey has not responded to that request as of this morning, Brooke.
I mean, just ultimately, just quickly, he's a private citizen now, so it's really up to him, right?
Yep, it's up to him, and I think he wants to lay low for a while.
Yep. Okay, Pamela, thank you. Excellent reporting from you today. Maeve Reston, just to Pamela's point, I mean, what do you make of Clapper once again refuting the president's words?
Well, I mean, it's really, there's a major credibility problem that the White House has, as we know, and that's been true for several months here. But, you know, the discussion of loyalty and Trump's demands for loyalty, that goes back a long time. I mean, I think the broader conversation that we need to be having here is what a chilling effect this firing has had on people wanting to serve in government. And that's been a problem for the Trump administration for a long time. There were loyalty tests for even the lowest level employees for a while until the pool literally got too small of people for them to hire. And I think that, the president is attempting to distract, as he often does with these tweets, to change the narrative. But we need to keep coming back to the question of who is going to be willing to serve, and are those the best people for us to have in government.
Let me just fill everyone in. So as we're talking about this loyalty pledge, this is CNN's reporting. This is from, Jake Tapper, and essentially hearing from the source close to Comey that when they had this dinner 7 days after Donald Trump became President Trump, they had this dinner at the White House. And the source close to Comey says that the president asked him essentially to requested assurances or a pledge of loyalty, and apparently Comey at the time was taken aback by it. He actually had the same response as Sean Spicer did in the briefing when he was asked, saying, listen, it's my job at the FBI. I pledged my loyalty to the U.S. Constitution, not to any one individual. And now you have the White House, Mark Preston, saying no, that's not how it went down, because Donald Trump never would have asked him for any sort of loyalty pledge.
Right. Loyalty to the country, which is what we would all expect. I also thought it was very telling at the very top, Brooke, when Sean Spicer was asked multiple times about the conversation and about the taping, and he said the president has nothing further to add to that. He said that several times, meaning that he's laying it at the doorstep of the president, which I thought was very smart on Sean Spicer's part, because in many ways he is being put out there, and I do agree, being this empathetic figure, to try to speak on behalf of a president who doesn't seem to have his back. But I do think we have to look at this, honestly, from about a 50 or 60,000 foot look, and looking down at the situation. We had a very serious hearing on Capitol Hill about world threats yesterday. Very scary things were said. We have the president heading overseas right now, his first foreign trip, and he is now being sidetracked by events that he has created, by reactions that he has created to those events. That is not really what a leader should be doing, and certainly not the leader of the free world. And I think that's what has caused a lot of frustration here in Washington, but also throughout the globe.
On the note of the various iterations of stories that we have all received this week over why he fired James Comey, this is what the president tweeted today. As a very active president with lots of things happening, it is not possible for my surrogates to stand at the podium with perfect accuracy. Here is Sean Spicer on that.
And I think sometimes we don't have an opportunity to get in to see him, to get his full thinking. In those cases, we do our best to follow up with you. But I think that there are times when you, more than not, read a story where someone's trying to pull apart one word, one sentence, and say, aha, and make it a gotcha thing. We work very hard to get you the most accurate and up-to-date information throughout the day.
Is the president considering canceling the daily press briefings?
I think he's a little dismayed, as well as a lot of people, that we come out here and try to do everything we can to provide you and the American people with what he's doing on their behalf, what he's doing to keep the nation safe, what he's doing to grow jobs, and yet we see time and time again an attempt to parse every little word and make it more of a game of gotcha.
Let's put the press briefing bit to the side. On the point of accuracy, doesn't the American public deserve facts and accuracy from that podium?
No matter who's the president, yes. And certainly past press secretaries have been slippery sometimes, tried to avoid answering questions or tried to spin people. But it's categorically different with this administration. The story of this administration so far is the dishonesty from Trump and from his aides. It doesn't start with his aides. It starts at the top with President Trump. And then it trickles down from there. People in power benefit from confusion. Trump benefits from confusion and chaos, as Mark Preston was saying. But I think we're seeing the value of the briefings today, Brooke. At that briefing, I think reporters were asking the same questions that my mom has, that my brothers have, that my wife has, that people watching at home have. So we talk about the value of the briefings, whether they're going to continue. I think Trump was just trolling us today by saying maybe we should rethink the briefings and not hold them anymore. Just trying to stir up the pot some more and create more confusion and uncertainty. But we're seeing the value of the briefings on a day like today.
Gloria, what do you think on that?
You know, I would just argue with Sean's point that we're trying to parse words here. I think we were trying to figure out why the President of the United States fired his FBI director. And I don't think that's a question that's a gotcha question. I think it's a question we ought to be asking. And we didn't get a straight answer to it. In fact, we got one answer from... Right. We got one answer from the podium. We got another answer from the President of the United States. And if both of those answers are true and they can somehow be reconciled, then somebody at the podium ought to tell us that. What exactly happened? Because
I just I don't understand how Sean Spicer can say that he is dismayed by the coverage this week of this story when can't we, the media, say we're dismayed over the varying stories from the White House?
Right, because also if the president fired Comey because he was thinking about the Russia investigation and thought it had gotten out of control, that is a very important story when the president himself there are questions of whether his campaign team colluded with the Russians or, and indeed, the question of the Russian hack altogether, which most people think is very important. And the president doesn't seem to be coming out there every day and saying, this threatens our democracy. We need to get to the bottom of whether the Russians hacked into our election system and how they did it, and we ought to make sure that it never happens again. Instead, what we get from the president is, this is unfair. I was told I wasn't under investigation. Comey is a showboat, and so I fired him. And what we get from the White House podium is, well, we fired him. He was fired because of the way he treated Hillary Clinton. Well, what is it? What's the answer?
And to Gloria's point, I mean, it's the fact that you have this huge credibility problem, and as Mark said, all of these things going on in the world. I mean, clearly from the interview with Lester Holt, Trump is still obsessed with this Russia controversy because he thinks it has to do with the legitimacy of his election, and that is what he is thinking about and talking about all the time with people who he meets with. And the fact that our president is doing that. Yeah, is really troubling when there are so many other things going on in the world.
All right, he's listening to shows that are telling him, conservative TV shows that are telling him that this is all BS and that he shouldn't believe it and that he's a victim here. So it's being reinforced. Okay. He's a man in denial.
Let's put a button on this conversation. I think all of you, and I said it yesterday, I'll say it again, we just have to keep digging.